Hi, everyone. My name is Philippa Hughes, and I am the director of Looking for America. It's a project in which we have been going around the country, organizing bipartisan conversations, cross-partisan, and organizing art exhibits, answering the question, what does it mean to be American? We talk to Americans all over the country. And now we're collaborating with the Friedrich Ebert Foundation for a little side project in which we are talking to folks on the left to hear what they're thinking about right now as we lead into the election. And we are focused on people who live in battleground states in particular. So today we're in Michigan, and I am excited to talk to my friends in Michigan about what they're thinking. And so I'm going to let them introduce themselves first, and then we'll get right into it. Diane, would you mind starting?
Sure. My name is Diane Banks. I am the executive director of a local nonprofit organization that focuses on community improvement and philanthropy. And I live in a suburb of Detroit in Macomb County, Michigan, and I'm excited to be part of the conversation.
Great. Thank you. Anika?
Hi, I'm Anika Goss. I'm also the executive director of a nonprofit based in Detroit that focuses on economic development and land use and sustainability. I live in Detroit. I'm a third generation Detroiter. I grew up as a little kid in California too, but so I have a whole other side of my life in California, but Detroit is home.
Awesome. Oh, and I should mention that I actually met Anika in Germany. We were on a great trip there. So I love German films. Brandon?
My name's Brandon Bowman. I live in middle of Lapeer County, so kind of northern, the thumb area of Michigan for perspective. And I work in Macomb County, so I travel back and forth between the areas. I'm a library director, worked in that field for about 25 years now. Have been pretty much, doing that for ever since I even was in high school. I volunteered in libraries and things like that. So it's kind of part of who I am. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's get right into it. I was just reading a piece in the New York Times this morning about how our president has disparaged Dr. Fauci and says there's nothing to worry about, and that guy's an idiot. Are people in Michigan still talking about the pandemic, about the virus? What are people saying, and are people tired of it, or are they tired of the president?
Well, I'll start, unless you wanted to start, Diane.
Go ahead.
So I, and it really kind of saddens me because I do feel like the state is split in this way that's really, really unfortunate. Detroit experienced, Southeast Michigan, the numbers were just exponential. And in Detroit alone, we lost 1,500 people, and plus several thousand people that were sick, including me. I was very, very sick for a very long time. And so I think the conversation is definitely here. How do we make sure that we're all better so that we can get back to school and get the economy back, get people back in business, making sure our businesses are secure. But to be clear, the loss that Detroit has experienced, 1,500 people in a really short period of time, is profound. So that means every person here in Detroit has experienced loss at some level or severe illness. And so I think that's really the perspective that we're seeing down here.
Yeah, I'd say I'm kind of more where I live is a lot more northern Macomb County, which is very red. Most people that live around me, lots of Trump signs. And I'd say, you know, I attend church, so I'm active in my church, and most people in my church that I know. It's interesting because day to day, people are wearing their masks. You know, they understand that the virus is still out there, and they're doing what needs to be done. But as soon as you start talking politics, the whole conversation changes. And, you know, I have friends that think that it's no big deal. The virus is no big deal. Like, bring it on. If I get it, oh, well, I'll be fine and life will continue. And then, you know, friends that are more in like the health field, doctors and nurses that I know, you know, I think they're much more conflicted. They obviously know the science and they trust the science. But then politics gets in the way of that too, and that changes the conversation. So it creates a lot of stress, a lot of stressful conversations I've had, even just with friends. It's hard to even change the narrative at all and just, you know, have some empathy. But it definitely depends on whether you've been touched. Like Anika said, it depends on whether somebody in your family has been very sick and you can see that and it's tangible and you've been affected by it, or if you haven't and all you see is what's on the news and what you're getting from Fox News or wherever, then you're going to think completely different about it. So, I mean, that is the sad part. I mean, I think anybody with a science background, I don't know how they can, you know, not take it seriously and think that, you know, the least I can do is wear a mask. But for people that really don't understand science or, you know, how viruses work or how your immunity works or anything like that, I think for them, it's pretty hard to make any changes in their personal life. And they think of it more of a right or whatever that is. And it is hard. I think it creates a lot of stress for people, relationship wise, for those of us who think differently than those around us, I guess. I'm sure Brandon probably is feeling that too.
Real quick before we go to Brandon, I was thinking about how I mean, I live in a very liberally place, and so I don't have those kind of conversations as much. But I was thinking, I wonder if people are wearing their masks because they are deep down, they know they're scared, but outwardly they're like arguing with you about whether they should wear their mask or whatever, because they have to, because of tribalism or because we're polarized. So they know their position they're supposed to take.
Right.
But deep down they're like, oh, but I better wear the mask because, you know, people are dying.
Yeah.
You have any, I mean, I don't know.
I think it's an automatic to go to the talking points.
Yeah.
They're used to hearing the talking points from whoever. So that's where they go, even though if they really take a step back and logically think about it for a minute, that probably wouldn't be their first response. But even I've noticed that on the news too, when they're just like talking to Joe Schmo on the street and they ask a question, the automatic response is a talking point, something that you're hearing in the news and not necessarily related to their everyday life. So that for me is really frustrating. It's like, can we just get away from the talking points and have like an honest conversation about what you believe? Yeah, in your heart. But
yeah. Anyway, Brandon.
Yeah, so living out where I do, I've lived here pretty much my entire life. It is not so much that they don't believe the science, is that they think the mask is a form of control. So it's like, I don't want to wear the mask because someone's telling me to do it, and you know I'm going to be you know, I'm bucking authority by not wearing the mask, even though if you know, when you try to talk with people and really boil it down, saying, well, you know, the government, if they really want to control you, they have a multitude of ways to do so already. I mean, you pay your taxes, you have your license, you have, you know, you pay car insurance. And so they're, you know, if they really want to control you, they already have those mechanisms in place. So if I was going to choose one, it wouldn't be a paper mask to do so. So I think that's the hard thing up here, is that everyone, I think it is part of tribalism, you know, saying, show my allegiance to, you know, whatever ideals this may be, you know, by fighting against the mask. And where I'm at, don't wear masks. You know, we really have to fight with people to wear masks up here, you know. So I'll go to the local grocery store and you can count the number of people who don't have masks on when you walk in. And like during the major part of the pandemic, you know, back in like March and April, you would see people wearing the masks and stuff. And then like when May and June started coming around, people stopped wearing their mask. And so you go in the grocery store and you'd say, you know, in March and April, you'd have maybe like 2 or 3 who weren't wearing it. By April, you know, end of April, early May, June, you have like 10 people not wearing your mask in a small store. So those were the kind of frustrations for me out here, is like, you know, I am one of the few people on the street who, you know, my neighborhood is, my city is about 15,000 people. And it is pretty much red. I am one of the few people who, you know, is of a liberal persuasion out here. So but I do see a lot more people starting to trend away from the Trump signs and stuff. So, which is nice to see. But you know, this election cycle, especially, there's not as many as there were in 2016, but it is still quite prevalent. But I don't know if they don't believe the science, or it's just a matter of being intentionally obtuse. So I guess it would be, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I've been wondering that myself.
Yep.
I feel like we can't not talk about the threats to your governor's life.
Yes.
I mean, what the heck, you guys? I'm at a loss. I don't even know what question to even ask about that. That just seems so insane to me. Who are those people and what happened?
I guess, well, living where I live, I encounter this quite a bit. There's a lot of militias basically are, you know, centered in the thumb area of Michigan here. They are very strong and mostly around gun rights. But they, over the past probably 20 years or so, have really more into a lot of white supremacist ideology, very anti-government. So, you know, when you think of militia, you think of, oh, someone's supposed to, you know, protect the area from, you know, foreign invaders. And but really out here, it means I don't like the government and I want my guns. And, you know, and I guess I'm kind of a weird duck, as, you know, I am a liberal person who, you know, owns firearms, and I grew up around them, and I, you know, have went through extensive training and stuff. You know, I have had a CPL, concealed pistol license before, you know, and, but you know, I don't understand the kind of the ideology that goes along with the militias out here. They are very, very ingrained, and the further you go into the center of the thumb of Michigan, the worse it gets. And of course, you know, we have the history of, you know, the McVeighs and all that kind of stuff with Oklahoma bombing. That all came north of where I live. So kind of, you know, there's a long history of this being in this area. So I'm honestly not surprised that it happened here in Michigan. I'm kind of shocked that it took as long as it did for it to happen, really. So
That's how I thought too. I was shocked, but at the same time, not that surprised, just from people I know that are connected, or just the language and the vitriol that was happening during the whole lockdown against Whitmer. You know, it's not surprising that this group kind of took it to that next step. I mean, obviously we're all fortunate that they caught it and the FBI got involved with it. But like Brandon, I guess I'm surprised that there hasn't been any other actions against government, you know, other government leaders in the past, just based on the language that you hear.
Yeah, during the lockdown, when this group protested in Lansing,
Mm-hmm.
and they were allowed to actually go into the Capitol with guns, with, you know, confronting the state police inside of the Capitol, trying to get on the Capitol floor. It was, I think the rest of the state was like, okay, you have let these people get completely out of control, right? But I think what's really important is that, you know, one of the things that I feel like this is probably the best lesson learned, and I really hope I'm not offensive when I say this. I spent a lot of time I worked in Peoria, Illinois for 4 years. And where I ended up having to work was a lot of what probably looked like the communities where they were from, where these folks were from. And one of the things that I learned was two things. One, Michigan doesn't invest in its own people. We don't do a good job in investing in education, period. Right? So you might go to school, you will get a very basic education, and then there's nothing else for you to do. And so what I learned from working in Peoria, working really, really closely in a lot of these really poor white, all white communities that were living in trailer communities, very dilapidated trailer communities, and really kind of isolated, and often isolated by industry and jobs that were no longer there and available to them. And they had no skills to do anything else, and refused to take any kind of government support because they felt like government support were for Black and Hispanic people. And so they would rather live in a rat-infested trailer than take any kind of government support. But they also felt like no one was listening to them. And I don't mean listening over the virus and like you have to stay at home, but there's a level of desperation that was really occurring for some of these families because they had isolated themselves so much, and they had literally nowhere else to go. So if you are a man and you got laid off, you don't have a job, you've got kids, maybe you have a few different kids out here, and you have no way of supporting your family, and you have no other alternative. And this militia, it's no different than any other gang kind of mentality, right? When we think about urban gangs, this is why folks join urban gangs, because they don't have ties to anything else. They don't have anywhere else to look towards. There's no job opportunities. I'm going to join this gang. And I think that was the sense that I got in Peoria, and that was the same kind of wild desperation that I saw on Capitol Hill. And then we saw the result of that. I think what's really scary, I think coming up on the election day, I think people are down here in Southeast Michigan, I think we're more concerned about what election day is going to look like. You know, are these people going to come down here and with their guns and try to intimidate voters? I think people are more worried about, what's next.
I mean, our president has already sort of encouraged people to observe.
Yeah.
Polls. So what does that even mean exactly?
Yeah, I saw a Facebook thing that went around that there's a meeting happening for patriots who want to watch the polls, and they need to come to this meeting and learn more information and volunteer at their polling site to be there as a poll watcher. And it looked very official. In fact, it even came from somebody running for office. So, they're expecting that not only should they be there, but they're requested to be there and play this role. So that is, I agree. I think that's really scary for voter suppression and what's going to happen on election day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, out here, I'm not worried so much because I'm sure a lot of people don't know who else is going to come to the polls with a gun. So that kind of lowers it down. And of course, around here, you don't have to worry so much about suppressing the vote because 99% of the people are going to vote one way. Especially in my county. My county was one of the strongholds for the president in this last election. We really, they all went all out for him. So I don't worry so much about it out here, but I do worry about them going to other places and, intimidating voters. I have two sons who are, in various spots around the state and in much more conflicted areas. And I worry about them being able to go to the polls and vote. So that is definitely something that's on my mind in that regard. But out here, not so much, because like I said, I don't think they would really get much from it other than a propaganda perspective.
Mm-hmm. I want to to go back to something Anika just said about education. Can you pull that thread a little bit more? Like, were you trying to say if there were better education, maybe we would not have this sort of situation?
I feel like poor education in Michigan is a people of color problem, right? Like that's how we talk about it. That's how we think about it, that we have poor, that we don't invest in, we have bad schools in urban centers in Detroit, Flint, Saginaw, where there are more people of color. And when in fact, Michigan is at the bottom quadrant for public schools nationally. And part of that problem is that our education system was really designed to be able to pass the plant test, like the Ford Motor Company, General Motors, all of that. We used to have to take a test to get a job at the plant. And so they would teach to the test, right? Like they didn't expect for everybody to go to college, they were building workers. And so the education system that we have now, we think of that poor education as being, as the poor communities being the communities of color, but all of these same places where there are low income white households are dealing with the same poor school education problems, the lack of technology, the lack of options once you graduate, as you're matriculating, high dropout rates, poor reading skills. And this is all, these are all communities that we're not really talking about. And I think that this is what we end up with, right? Like this miseducation, you're listening to this propaganda that's violent but empowering, especially now that you have a weapon and everything limited in your tiny universe that you've created in your undereducated environment all makes sense because it's coming from someone who listens and values you, the militia, this gang.
I think there's also part of it too is, where I live, we had a really good education system through the whole entire time I was in school. And then when Proposal A was passed in the early 90s, I think that was a very huge detriment to the way that schools are funded here in the state, where it took the money and was supposed to evenly distribute it better throughout the state, which has not happened. It really has been a defunding mechanism for education in the state of Michigan rather than a funding mechanism. And so,
Brandon, could I
yes.
interrupt for our non-Michigan audience?
Yes.
Can you explain more context on that?
Yeah, so Proposal A was a initiative passed in the early 90s, which basically at that point in time, funding all came from your local taxes. So as a community, you could fund your school at any level that you wanted to. With Proposal A, all the money went to the state, and then the state would distribute it based on a per pupil capita. So basically it would go, so the bigger schools would get more money because they had more students to take care of, but they would release a amount of money per student. So like right now, I think it's like $6,400 per student goes to each school district per student. And so right now, like there are certain schools that were grandfathered in, mostly in Oakland County, who get more than that. So there are school districts down there who get maybe closer to 15 or 16,000 per student, whereas the school district where I'm at will get about 100. And Detroit is much the same. So a student that's in Detroit who has a lot more needs, say, for instance, than students in my area, they both get the same amount of money. So that is the problem, where you have, and then also you factor in schools of choice, which came along with that as well, where students can go to any school district that they want as long as the school will accept them. So what happened is all of the poorer schools got left behind, and the bigger schools just kept getting more and more and more kids. So, and you see that in a lot of communities who don't have any kind of growth potential. A lot of suburbs of Detroit fall into this area where there's no growth. There's no families are moving out of these areas. There's no more kids coming in. So the schools continue to fail and fail and fail. And it's not their fault because there's no more kids coming in. So they have to take kids from all over to meet their economic needs. So it's a really bad system.
Yeah, and so that same model in places that are really rural struggle for the
Yes.
opposite reason that
Mhm.
urban schools struggle, right?
Yep.
And so you can see how this would have this on two different ends of on the spectrum. We're failing young people, and the majority of the group that was arrested, the 13, were under 30. These were very young people that were part of this.
Hmm. I mean, I don't know a lot about education policy, but you know, I have this sort of superficial knowledge of like when schools are funded by just by the district, that's also an unfair way to fund schools, right? Like wealthier districts have more money and the other schools have to raise money from the parents.
Yes. Yeah, that's where you get into the
That.
Oakland. Yeah, that's where you get into the Oakland County here in Michigan. It's one of the wealthiest counties in the nation. They can fund their schools at levels that, like schools in my area, could never dream of unless you were taxing
Right.
people to oblivion. So because they have the technology base, or they have the infrastructure for, they have the businesses, they have areas to get those tax funds. So they can levy a much smaller millage rate and get a lot more for their money. Whereas out here, you'd have to probably do 4 or 5 times what they're levying, and it would basically fall on the backs of the average homeowner instead of a business.
Yeah. So which way is Michigan gonna go in the election? What are your predictions?
It's so hard to know. I mean, we thought in 2016, it was looking towards going blue, but I mean, especially Macomb County, it's such a microcosm of the U.S. in some ways, and that's why it's been focused on as that swing area in the state. Or like I said, I live in the northern part of Macomb County. I see an awful lot of Trump signs, and every weekend they've been out. Hall Road's one of our main thoroughfares right through the middle of the county, and they've been out waving flags and having these big rallies every weekend. They're out there in the middle of the county, so there's a lot of enthusiasm for that base. But I know as you kind of drive farther south in the county, you see a lot more Biden signs and Biden support. So it's gonna be interesting. Actually, I think when they looked at the polling from 2016, it really came down to two city township right in the middle of our county that it really came down to, and depending on which way that city goes is going to be likely how the entire election goes. So yeah, it's hard to say.
Do you have a prediction, Anika?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
What's your prediction for which way you think Michigan's going to go in the Electoral College?
Oh, that's rough. I have a lot of confidence that I'm really trying to be optimistic that that people outstate will be much more focused on what's important to them and voting from values. I do know, and I do expect that Detroit will be able to represent more, and that will create some balance with the Electoral College, so that our Electoral College will be much stronger for Biden-Harris than it was for Clinton for the last election, where we did not have a voter count. I think part of the problem, if there's any problem that we have, it's that we're still using the antiquated electoral system that I'm pretty sure what we used when Coleman Young was running for mayor in 1969. So that is what will trip us up, is that our processes are poor, but we're already seeing people voting. People are already trying to get organized around this. People are planning to vote, volunteering to make sure that the process, I'm a part of the process this year. I'm going to be an electoral supervisor, and troubleshooter for the election. But I don't know. I think we might actually see a bigger difference than we're anticipating this year.
I think it really comes down to turnout, you know, and what barriers there are. I mean, it is encouraging to see how many ballots have already been casted. You know, I don't know when you look at Republican versus Democrat, what that looks like, but that is encouraging, which is saying that, you know, we're already seeing higher turnout than 2016, which is certainly positive, I think, on the liberal side. But really it's going to come down to election day and then what happens, because we all know we're not going to have the results that day. So, you know, what type of legal battle ensues if it comes to that afterwards. That's the part that, you know, is a little more scary for me. And especially with the whole electoral college and the fact that, you know, the minority party is in representation nationally, you know, and then in my area, there's most of the local, they're running unopposed. There's not even a Democratic candidate, because why bother? Why spend any of that money? So, you know, for people who are in our area that are in the minority party, we can't even, you know, vote for our party on the national level. You see the minority party in charge. So, you know, I don't know. I think that's just kind of an interesting thing that makes it hard to be hopeful, I guess, for the election, but still have that little bit of hope.
Brandon, you're in deep red territory. What's your thought? What's your prediction?
I'm hoping that with the ability for people to vote not on the day with the absentee, the no cause absentee ballots will allow a lot more people who have not been able to vote before to vote. And you know, looking at the numbers, I've been kind of following this, is there's more people who have voted now absentee ballot already than we had in the 2016 elections. So that is fantastic news. Getting people to vote anyway. You know, I guess for me, it's either way you vote, I don't care as long as you're voting, because that way, you know, that way we have a true representation of what's going on, you know, is important to me. But I think the numbers do tend to lead me to believe that Michigan will probably go more blue than last year or last time, especially given our representation in the 2018 midterm elections, you know, where we definitely came out strong and did very well, you know, electing some really fantastic candidates. So I think this year I'm more confident, and I am also looking to the fact that with the new redistricting laws that we have here in the state, it will start allowing our local or our state level politics to reflect really what the state is, rather than the gerrymandered areas that we have now. So I think that will, in the long run, help us out as well.
So, you know, I am obsessed about thinking about the election and, you know, all the virus, all the things like related to the election. But let's say I'm just going to create this vision of Biden-Harris win. You know, it doesn't solve all of our problems, but it certainly puts us in a different trajectory. What do you wish we would start talking about more, other than the president and his drama?
Yeah, all those issues that matter, climate change and education and, you know, those more complicated things that require more conversation at every level of government.
You know, what I think is that the worst thing that's happened, the divisiveness that's occurred during this administration, like a lot of Midwestern cities, Detroit is 78% African American, and the rest of the state, but only 14% representative in the state, African Americans, right? But because of this new culture, this new moment in time that we're living in, where inequity and racial divides and what it means to be Black in America is so much a part of the conversation now. What I'm hoping most of all is that Biden-Harris will set a new culture of understanding on both sides so that we can begin to have more conversations that are honest and that are engaging and that are productive. Whereas before, I think even during the Obama administration, and I think this is really the difference, that during the Obama administration, I think there still weren't honest conversations that there are inequities that exist for people of color. That there were a lot of white people that thought just because Obama was in office means, so we're done with this, right? You're good. And I think now there's been such an awakening of so many people, all of the books, all of the talks, all of the Zoom forums on race and equity and culture and ethnicity, that we would have a moment to be able to really have honest, open, and competent conversations that we can understand what this inequity has done to tear us apart and how we can rebuild together. We all win. If every single one of us has the opportunity to be successful, Michigan wins, right? And I really want to be hopeful that we can actually do that, that it won't be this liberal agenda, blah, 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 blah. We just won't win from that kind of attitude.
I really hope those conversations happen either way. But yeah, it does change the background around who's at the table having that conversation, I think, depending on which way the election goes.
I guess I'm more pessimistic because of the people that I interact with. I think that, there's going to be that level of, it's a liberal agenda, yada, 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 so on and so forth, because it has been growing every year since, since I started paying attention in the early 80s. Is, it always becomes down to partisanship. It's not what's best for the state as a whole, or even what's best for the even your county as a whole. It comes down to sticking it, stick it to the man, stick it to your opposite party. Whereas I think that's going to continue as time goes on. I think that's where we are in politics right now. And I wish it wasn't that way, because my grandfather was I guess you would call him like an Eisenhower Republican, and he always told me that he was the best deals are when everyone leaves the table feeling like they got the shaft. And I think that's kind of where we need to get back to, is it's not always my way and it's not always yours way. It's kind of that compromise. And we've just kind of really lost that over the last, 20 some, 30 some odd years. And it's, I hope we can get back to that someday, because while I may have my beliefs, I also understand that there are people who have the opposite beliefs. And I think somewhere in the middle is something that we can all live with. But out here, it's definitely, red as red can be. And, there are people out here who definitely use that to their advantage, because they're not Republican, they're not conservative. They just run on that party ticket to get whatever they want. So then you end up with people like Todd Corser, who was here in our state, who, got into state office and basically used it as his own little playground and got into a lot of trouble doing things. And I think that's the thing that I think Anika was alluding to earlier, is you don't even run for a public office, or I think it was maybe Diane said this, you don't even run for a public office out here as a Democrat or Green Party or anything else, because you're not going to win, because it doesn't matter who you are, it's what that letter is after your name. So I think that's where, in order for things to happen, we have to get past some of that partisanship. And I don't know what the answer is, how to do that, because it's a conversation that has to happen, but it has to happen in such a way, basically almost you need like a facilitator to step in and just saying, hey, we need to, here's your perspective, here's my perspective, let's kind of mesh them together and see that we're, in a lot of areas, we're not so far off. But I guess for my hope for the election is that maybe we'll get over some of our xenophobia and really looking at immigration as something that is a positive for our country, especially living in Macomb County, or living in Lapeer County and working in Macomb County. These are two areas that desperately need population growth in order to survive over the next couple of years, and we're not going to have it unless we have immigration. Working with there's a group called SEMCOG, which is the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, and they've done a study about how the area around here is going to grow over the next 25 years, and without immigration, it's going to be completely stagnant. And so I don't think a lot of people in this area understand that without immigration, we are going to lose. I think they said it would be 100,000 population loss within the next 25 years in this area, which would be huge. So I think that's my hope out of this, is that, maybe we'll be able to rescind a lot of the immigration policies that have been passed over the last 4 years and get back to something more normal. I could shoot for pie in the sky and say, hey, we'll get rid of all the immigration standards, and people who want to come here, go back to almost like a Ellis Island kind of, immigration policy, without quotas. But I don't think that'll ever happen. It's a dream, I guess.
Well, that opens up a whole other Pandora's box of things for us to talk about, but I want to be respectful of our time because I have a lot of opinions on that too. I'm sure you all do too. Thank you so much for taking time to do this. This has been so interesting for me. Seriously, thank you. And hope it's interesting to our audience as well.
I hope so too. This was really great. So I think, Philippa, you've been invited to come back. This will be I think we'll probably need you. You'll have to have conversations all over the state to bring us all back together.
I'm working on that. So yeah.
Civic discourse needs to happen a lot more. And I think a lot of people are afraid to have it, but then once you do it, it's, it's healing and important.
That's right.
And very personal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this isn't just, we're talking about politics, but this is really, really personal for people.
And it should be, because I think we've focused too much on this sort of national thing that that's a lot of that stuff doesn't have anything to do with us. What are the things that have to do with us? That's when it gets good.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
It's nice meeting both of you.
Yes,
Nice
you
to meet you.
too.
Wow.